What if the biggest companies in the world could steal billions, poison communities, crash airplanes, launder drug money, and fuel the deadliest drug epidemic in American history, and nobody goes to prison? That is not a hypothetical. Every company on this list did exactly that. They got caught. They paid fines so small they booked them as operating expenses. 8 companies, billions in damage, 0 CEOs in prison. Let us go through the rap sheet. Between 2002 and 2016, Wells Fargo employees opened approximately 3.5 million fake bank accounts and credit cards in customers' names. No permission, no consent. Employees fabricated email addresses and PIN numbers to enroll people in services they never asked for. The reason? Crushing internal sales quotas. If you missed your quota, you got fired. If you cheated, you got rewarded. Over 5,300 employees were terminated for the fraud. CEO John Stumpf resigned and received a lifetime banking ban and a $17.5 million fine. Wells Fargo paid $3 billion to the DOJ and SEC in 2020. Then another $3.7 billion to the CFPB in 2022. Total fines exceeded $4.5 billion. That sounds massive until you realize the bank made $103 billion in revenue in 2019 alone. Think about that ratio. In June 2025, the Federal Reserve lifted the asset cap it had placed on the bank 7 years earlier. The one executive who faced potential prison time was Carrie Tolstedt. She received 6 months of home confinement. But Wells Fargo was not even the most brazen offender on this list. In September 2015, the EPA discovered that Volkswagen had installed defeat device software in 11 million diesel vehicles worldwide. The software detected when a car was being emissions tested, and it activated pollution controls. On the actual road, those cars spewed up to 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen oxide, a gas linked to respiratory disease and thousands of premature deaths. The scam ran for 6 years across Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche vehicles. When researchers at West Virginia University first flagged the discrepancy in 2013, Volkswagen blamed technical glitches for an entire year. The total cost was approximately $30 billion in fines and settlements in the United States alone, plus an estimated $38 billion globally. The company pled guilty to 3 criminal felonies and paid a $2.8 billion criminal penalty, the largest ever imposed on an automaker. And the number of senior executives who served prison time in the United States? 0. Chief Executive Officer Martin Winterkorn was indicted in the United States, but never extradited from Germany. And if you think poisoning the air is as bad as it gets, you have not seen what comes next. Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family launched OxyContin in 1996 and marketed it as less addictive than other opioids. Internal documents show the company knew the drug was highly addictive. Sales representatives were trained to tell doctors that addiction risk was less than 1%. Since 1999, the opioid crisis has been linked to over 900,000 overdose deaths in the United States. Let that number sink in. 900,000 people. Purdue pled guilty to federal criminal charges twice, once in 2007 and again in 2020. The Sackler family extracted over $10 billion from the company before it filed for bankruptcy in 2019. PLE'd guilty. In November 2025, a bankruptcy judge formally approved a $7.4 billion settlement. The Sacklers agreed to pay up to $7 billion over 15 years. Individual victims could receive roughly $8,000 to $16,000 each. No member of the Sackler family has ever been criminally charged. They remain billionaires. Here is the part that should terrify anyone who boards an airplane. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea. 189 people dead. Less than 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed 6 minutes after takeoff. 157 more dead. Both crashes were caused by a faulty flight control system called MCAS that Boeing had concealed from the FAA and from the pilots flying the planes. Internal emails showed Boeing employees knew about the problems. One engineer wrote that MCAS was designed by clowns, supervised by monkeys. Congressional investigations revealed Boeing pressured the FAA and cut corners to save billions. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide for nearly 2 years. Boeing initially paid $2.5 billion in a deferred prosecution agreement, then breached that agreement. In November 2025, a federal judge dismissed the criminal case entirely, despite calling it the deadliest corporate crime in U.S. history. Boeing agreed to pay $1.1 billion, 346 people dead, 0 executives charged. One family member said Boeing bought its freedom, and Boeing was not the only company whose crimes had a body count. Some laundered the money that funded the bodies. Between 2006 and 2010, HSBC's Mexican subsidiary became the bank of choice for the Sinaloa cartel. Drug traffickers designed custom-shaped boxes that fit HSBC teller windows to deposit hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash every single day. The bank failed to monitor over $670 billion in wire transfers from Mexico and over $9.4 billion in physical U.S. dollar purchases. A 339-page Senate report laid out the full scale of the operation. HSBC admitted it had laundered at least $881 million in drug proceeds. The penalty? A $1.92 billion fine and 5 years of probation. Nobody was indicted. Not a single executive was charged. The fine represented roughly 5 weeks of profit. Senator Elizabeth Warren later said HSBC was too big to jail. If you think a bank cannot do worse than laundering cartel money, let me introduce you to Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse pled guilty in 2014 to helping thousands of U.S. clients hide billions in offshore accounts, paying $2.6 billion. Then came the Mozambique tuna bond scandal. In 2013 and 2014, Credit Suisse arranged over $2 billion in loans for Mozambique, supposedly for a tuna fishing fleet. Over $137 million was siphoned off as bribes. When Mozambique defaulted, 2 million people were pushed into poverty. Then the Archegos hedge fund collapse in 2021 cost Credit Suisse $5.5 billion. The Greensill Capital implosion froze $10 billion in client funds. There was money laundering for Bulgarian cocaine traffickers. There was spying on former employees. By March 2023, Credit Suisse had collapsed. UBS bought a bank once worth $100 billion for just $3.2 billion. And in December 2025, Swiss prosecutors charged Credit Suisse for failing to prevent money laundering in the Mozambique case. The lesson is simple: break the law for decades and your punishment is getting bought by a bigger bank. This next company did not launder money or crash planes. It did something arguably more invasive. It sold your mind. In March 2018, the Cambridge Analytica scandal revealed that Facebook had allowed a political consulting firm to harvest the personal data of up to 87 million users without consent. The data was used to build psychological profiles and target political advertising during the 2016 United States presidential election and the Brexit referendum. The FTC fined Facebook $5 billion, the largest privacy fine in United States history. Sounds enormous, right? Facebook reported $70.7 billion in revenue that year. The fine was 26 days of revenue. On the day the settlement was announced, Facebook's stock price went up because investors had expected a worse penalty. Think about what that tells you. In 2021, former employee Frances Haugen leaked documents showing Facebook knew its platform harmed teenage mental health and spread misinformation, and chose profit over safety. Congress held hearings, no legislation passed, Facebook changed its name to Meta and moved on. The last company on this list may be the most cold-blooded of all. For decades, Johnson & Johnson marketed its baby powder as pure and safe. Internal documents dating back to the 1970s showed that the company knew its talc products sometimes contained traces of asbestos, a known carcinogen. Rather than warn consumers, the company fought to keep the findings hidden. Tens of thousands of lawsuits were filed by women who developed ovarian cancer or mesothelioma after years of using talc-based products. Johnson & Johnson's legal strategy was extraordinary. The company used a maneuver called the Texas two-step. It created a subsidiary, loaded it with all talc liabilities, and then put that subsidiary into bankruptcy, shielding the $400 billion parent company from jury verdicts. In 2025, the company proposed a $9 billion settlement. Johnson & Johnson discontinued its talc-based baby powder in 2023. The company has never admitted wrongdoing. No executive has been criminally charged. 8 companies, billions in fines, hundreds of thousands of lives damaged or destroyed, and not a single CEO in a prison cell. Wells Fargo created millions of fake accounts. Volkswagen poisoned the air for a decade. Purdue fueled an epidemic that killed 900,000 Americans. Boeing concealed a flaw that killed 346 people. HSBC laundered money for the Sinaloa cartel. Credit Suisse collapsed under the weight of its own crimes. Facebook sold your data and called it a platform. Johnson & Johnson knew about the asbestos and sold the powder anyway. The question is not whether these companies got caught. They all got caught. The question is what happened next. And the answer, every single time, is a fine and a press release. If you want to see how one company's fraud almost destroyed an entire country, check out the next video. Subscribe so you do not miss it. The market never forgets.